Tom Evans, welcome back to the podcast, buddy. How are you?
Dylan, thank you so much for having me. Huge pleasure to be back. And yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. With a few days of reflection, what is the post-mortem on Black Canyon? How's your body? How's your mind?
Um, Both surprisingly good. I ended up doing on the Sunday, went back down to the race to cheer some of the Adidas Terex team. Cordis was racing, Cordis Hall. So that was fun to cheer for him. And we then got back to Sedona where we're staying and got into Whole Foods at like 6:30 in the evening. And I just completely hit the wall. And I was just walking around with no idea of what to buy, what to get. But yeah, that then passed. And then, I then had a long photo shoot on the Monday. And time on feet was like 7.5 hours. And I was just, by the end of that, I died. But I think it sort of shot my body into sort of just recovering quicker.
Yeah. You're probably looking forward to the transatlantic flight back home just to kick back and relax for a little while.
Yeah, it's like 10 hours. It's 10 hours where I can't do anything, which is 10 hours of sleep, which hopefully. Yeah. So no, but it's cool to still be out here and be able to reflect while I'm still out here.
Well, I have to say, man, like I've felt so terrible in my own training for months on end now. And I came home Saturday night and went for a nice run on Sunday morning. It was a crystal clear, quintessentially beautiful California day. And for the first time in ages, I felt like super inspired. I really enjoyed my run, and I owe it all to you guys who were out on the race course on Saturday. Just an unbelievable race experience. I suppose we should just sort of dive right into the fun stuff. I wondered if you'd start by maybe saying a few words about Anthony Costales, the only person to beat you on the race course on Saturday. In the post-race interview, he made a point of saying that the only reason he signed up for Black Canyon was because he saw your name on the start list, acknowledging that you're one of the best in the world. So I wondered if you just start by saying a few words about Anthony and the interaction you guys shared after the race.
Firstly, Anthony didn't just beat me. He destroyed me. He wiped the floor with me. And you can finish on the podium of some of the biggest races in the world. But when people are better than you, there's nothing you can do about it. You can try, but I thought Anthony's race was having done a bit of research before. I actually have raced Anthony before in the mountain running world championships in 2018 in Poland, that he also wiped the floor with me. So he's 2 for 0 at the moment. So, but it was, I think he just ran such a smart race. And he read the race so well. And when he had decided to put the hammer down, he knew that was the time to do it. And it was. And with all the best intentions. And I didn't think at the time when he was doing it, like, oh, well, I'm not going to go with him because I might catch him later. It was I can't go with him.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but my legs just aren't. They just wouldn't respond. And I thought it was a world-class performance in what I would describe as sort of a local event. Yeah. Which I think is the really special thing about racing in the US is you go to these, what would be described to in the UK as like a tin pot race that it seems fairly unorganized at the beginning. I got to the start line maybe 90 seconds before it started. Whereas you compare it to UTMB,
you have to go and sit on the ground for 30 minutes before they
exactly
the 10-minute music interlude before.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fine. That's great.
Yeah,
but this, you get a similar level of performance and it's just completely different. So for me, like it truly is grassroots community racing at its very best. And you get the best out of everyone because people are relaxed. And I think for Anthony, like him saying the reason that he signed up and the reason that when things were tough, he thought, oh, well, I should be doing this because I want to make the point. Like, I think for me that I want my approach to rub off on other people because like it works.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to, on paper, be the most talented. You don't have to have the best training background or come from a particular sporting background, but actually you do the basics and your basics are world class.
Yep. And I think the title of the first podcast that we did together was Basics Done Well.
Yeah. And for me, that's it. And I think what Anthony has shown is, I don't think, and I might be completely wrong, but I don't think he was doing anything particularly complex, particularly out of this world that people would look at and be like, oh my God, that's such a sexy workout. Or this gym session, you do this once, you're going to win the race.
Yeah.
It's basics done well, consistently, and working incredibly hard.
Yeah. It makes me want to ask you, Tom, about discipline. I think those who have followed you for a long time, both when you're healthy and through the recent injury process, one of the fundamental characteristics of your personality is robust discipline. I wondered how you cultivate and maintain that discipline, whether it's in training, rehab, junk food, alcohol consumption, those sorts of things. Does it come from the military background, and what can you teach people about cultivating it?
Yeah, I definitely, great question. I definitely think it does come from the military background, and I think that definitely laid the foundation for it. I love structure. I think you can compare trail runners. I think you rewind the clock 10, 15 years ago, and I think a lot of trail runners would, what's for training today? Oh, I'm just going to go and run and it's going to be great. And there's some people like that. I've trained with Timothy Olsen, and it was very much that case. And it works. Like, you look at his performances at Western States. Like, for me, that's mind blowing. And there was absolutely no way that I could function with, I'm just going to see how I feel. Maybe I'll do 4 hours, maybe I'll do 5 hours, and you end up doing 6 hours. For me, like, it needs to be, for me to get the best out of myself, I need to have the structure in place. And whether that's structure to, okay, this is just your time that you're going to go relax and enjoy and not think too much about the discipline or the structure of it, it's still very structured. And yeah, I think for me, like, the way that I've managed to keep it up is just by setting mini goals. Like, I think, well, I'll ask you a question. What do you think the percentage of ultra running is physical versus mental?
Well, I think, to echo your point about the basics done well, obviously the mental component of it is critically important, but that's sort of like why I ask you about discipline, because it's not only about having discipline in ticking the boxes in your training, nailing your interval sessions, getting the long runs in, but it's also the discipline of ensuring that you have confidence and self-belief, and that you have been doing your, visualization and things like that. And so, I mean, I, for one, very much resonate with your statement about, like, it's oftentimes, probably more cases than not, the most talented runner in the field, may not win races in ultra running. And, for my career, I very much view myself as somebody who is not one of the most talented people in the field, but who's been able to do certain things in the sport just based on hard work and sometimes having discipline and being a competitor. But I am also terrible with things like delayed gratification and, some of the doing some of the basics and maintaining focus on the basics year round?
Yeah. So I spend more time speaking with my psychologist than I do having treatment from soft tissue or physio. Whereas I would say 99% of people who are doing ultras will spend way more time with a physio than they would with a psychologist.
Huh.
And
Can
for
you
me,
say more about that? I'm sure the audience would be really interested to hear your relationship with your sports psychologist. What sort of things maybe you struggle with in terms of maybe confidence, insecurity, and how it's helped you?
I think for me, it really started with my injury. And I guess this is a nice segue to come on to the injury. And
yeah,
don't get me, like, physically, I found it super tough being injured, but mentally it was way worse. And I had sort of spoken to sports psychologists before, but it had been a bit unstructured, and I probably told them what I thought they wanted to hear rather than actually telling them what I think. Having read lots of sports psychology and performance psychology books and tweets, I guess, I thought I knew what they wanted to hear. So that's what I would sort of just reel off. And I guess it really took me to open up and to show my insecurities that, geez, when I got injured, now I've only done, I think I've run 500k races and 200 milers. That's it.
Yeah.
And people say, "Oh, Tom, you're one of the best in the world." I've only ever raced 7 races. Like, that's nothing. Like, you look at a footballer. How long has it taken Messi to become one of the best players in the world? I don't know, 400 or 500 games.
Yep, decades.
Yeah, I've raced 7 times, and yes, my first race was in 2017. I was then injured in 2020 and 2021. So I raced 2017, 2018, 2019, COVID and injury, and then came back in 2022.
Yep.
I'm now 31. I've been only running for 4 years, which really isn't a long time. And people are putting you, "Oh, you're one of the favorites for this race." I'm like, I've got no experience. Like, I've spent, and I come from a sporting background. I come from a military background where, yes, I've got a good training age, I guess you would say, because it's very non-specific, similar to you, that you've come in it from a different background.
Yeah.
But one, like, massive imposter syndrome, which I think I've dealt with. I now believe that post UTMB, standing on the starting of UTMB, like, you're pretty starstruck, and you're thinking, geez, there are 30 guys here who I could genuinely finish 30th here.
Yeah.
Or I could not finish, or you could have an amazing race. And it was, for me, it was kind of, I'd had races, like, I take Western States in 2019, that I had a really good day where it didn't feel particularly hard. And relatively, yes, it was hard, but there was no point where I thought, "Oh my God, I'm going to drop out." And then going on to my next 100 mile, I'm like, "Oh, well, what if that was just pure luck? Like, what if this happens? What if that happens?" So for me, speaking with the psychologist, it was just it's not for him to figure out how to just get rid of these things. For him, it's setting up a process that I can follow to keep that side of my brain occupied, and feed it when it needs to, starve it when it needs to, but come up with a process that I can set short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals with him that I really believe in. And then when things get really tough and you start doubting yourself, you just say, right, well, this was the goal that I set when I was sat down, either at a computer or face-to-face, when I was thinking rationally.
Yeah.
This is what I believed in when everything was going fine. And this is what I've been setting my target to. So now you're worrying about these things. You're like, well, why am I worrying? When I was thinking straight, this is exactly what I thought I should be doing. So yeah, I think it's super interesting. And like, I'm a huge believer in setting goals, and whether they're like performance goals or they're outside of performance goals, whether they're short-term goals like a weekly goal or a monthly goal or a yearly goal. And I will probably go on to speak about this when we speak about Western States. But yeah, for me, it's very methodical. And like, I basically just keep asking myself, like, so what? Like, why are you, everything I do has a purpose.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? And if it's like, I'm sitting down in the middle of the day watching Netflix. Like, why are you doing this? Is this taking you closer to any of the short-term goals that you've set, or the midterm or the long-term goals? If the answer is genuinely yes, great. Watch away, binge watch a whole series if that fits with your goal.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, if you've got a 6-hour long run to do and you've been binge watching Survivor, which I've just started watching, very good American program, then does it fit in with the goals? No. Well, deep down, and I guess that's where the discipline sort of then comes out. And so, yeah, I found working with a sports psychologist, for me, it's fundamental, and it's now a part of my program. It's as important for me as going to the gym or going and doing intervals. And I think performance wise, I get way more from speaking to my sports psychologist than I do from doing a hard uphill tempo.
Beautiful. It makes me want to ask if you guys have talked about your personal relationship with competition. Like, to what extent are you intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated?
I think for me, it's a real combination, I would say. And I think a lot of growing up, I would say I wanted to be an extrovert. Like, I wanted to play team sports because that's what my friends did. I didn't want to run because I didn't want to be on my own. I needed that sort of external gratification of people saying, "Oh, Tom, well done. That was so good." But the more I think about it, the more introvert I am. And yeah, I motivate myself. Like, I look back when I got training diaries from when I was like 13 years old. And it was so, I didn't have a coach and it was so unstructured. But I look back at it now, I'm like, I was training properly at that age. Like, I was doing structured workouts. Like, I would decide, like, I'd set a goal, like, right, I want to run school cross country 10K and I want to win. I was doing like 4x8 minutes at 10K pace when I was 13 years old. These are now sessions that you're seeing on the Sweat Elite YouTube channel of Olympic athletes doing. And I'm like, I wrote this when I was 13. So for me, that was such internal motivation. But for me now in races, like, yes, I want to do well and I want to do well for myself. But when things get really tough, my needs and things go out the window, and I really draw on the strength of other people. Like, I didn't for UTMB, like, yes, I want to do well. I want to do well to prove to myself, yeah, you've still got it.
Yep.
You deserve to be here. But also for me, it was what I want to show everyone who has helped me and got me to this place. I want to say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when things are really tough, I want to keep working because I feel like they deserve that massive thank you and that gratification from me. And it's why I salute at the end of a race. Yes, it's slightly to do with the military, but a salute is a term of respect.
Yes.
I salute is for the people who, it's not for me. It's for everyone else. It's for the people who have been working at the aid stations. It's for my physio. It's for Sophie, my wife. It's for the people who have come out and stood in rain, shine, whatever it is, to support you to being there, because I want to say thank you. And I want to give back as much as I can. So, and I guess moving back briefly onto Anthony, like for me, that my mentality and my methodology has inspired him to become a better version of himself. For me, that is the biggest fuel for me for Western States. Like he has inadvertently motivated me so much.
Yeah. It's a classic iron sharpens iron, steel sharpens steel, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I want more people. I want to sign up to race, and I want people to think, oh wow, what a cool opportunity to be able to race against Tom.
Yeah.
I want to be my very, very best on that day. And for me, that's why I got into this. That's why I love this sport so much. Like I want to inspire people to be their best. Like, so for me, it's just, for him to say that was just like a goosebump moment. And that put a lot of sort of demons to bed. Like people do see the hard work, and if it can inspire one person, amazing. If it can inspire 1,000 people, even better.
Yeah.
But just because it was one person, that's enough for me.
Yeah. Fantastic. You just mentioned your wife, Sophie. You were married just a couple of months ago. We were talking about it before the race this past weekend. And I wondered if you could share too, you mentioned briefly about your injury. We don't need to go terribly into detail there. I'm sure it was really difficult for you. She was there by your side through that. She was also by your side when you came across the finish line at UTMB with your classic salute. I wondered if maybe you could just say a few words about that, like the devotion that's born through those highs and lows in life, her also being an athlete, how you guys have supported each other on the journey.
Yeah, great. And again, another great question. It was, I suppose the best thing about two athletes being together is the understanding of when things are great, things are great. When things are rough, things are rough. What I initially found really hard was she was at her very, very best. She was doing things in her races that I want to do in my races. And I was on crutches. I couldn't walk. I couldn't make myself a cup of tea. I couldn't do anything. And she was racing out of her skin. And at the beginning, that got me. I was obviously super, super happy for her, but super frustrated for myself. So then after sort of climbing out of my sort of the hole of self-pity, I sort of thought, right, well, goals for myself are great, but I love helping people. So what goals can I set myself to help her get even better? Like, what can I do to help that one will keep me motivated and it becomes a team performance for both of us? So, like I was her, in a cycling term, I was her domestique for 3-4 months. And that kept me super motivated, whether it was she would puncture on a bike ride, so I would drive out as quickly as I could with a spare wheel and a pump. Or it was I would get up for swimming with her so I could make her breakfast before she went swimming. And then I would sort out everything in the house, or like whatever it was. I sort of became the stay-at-home dad. I'd do some rehab. I'd speak to my psychologist. I'd go to physio. Like, it was super easy. But for me, it was so motivating and inspiring being able to help her and see her achieving what she was achieving. And then when she finished third at her the grand final, basically their equivalent of UTMB.
Yep.
And she finished third, and that was such a huge breakthrough moment. Like, for me, that it all just became completely worth it. And I think the link between mind and body, 2 days after she 2 days after she finished third, was the first run that I did post surgery. So like, I think she is the reason that I got back so quickly, because of the motivation, the inspiration that she gives to me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it works. It works really nice in that way. But in the other way, like, geez, since we've been married, we've spent more time apart than we have together, which is pretty wild. But we knew that was going to happen when we got together. So we make the most of it when we're at home. And then when we're away, FaceTime's great. But yeah, we just sort of look forward to being at home with each other and get as much as we can out of each other when we're at home.
I love it, man. Thanks for sharing that. I've heard you talk about the concept of race management, and you were just saying you've only raced like 7 times and you're known as one of the best in the world. I think that's probably because of the fact that you are a fantastic race manager. What data are you listening to during competition, and how do you filter that data? How does it inform your race management?
Interesting question. Data in a race, 0. It doesn't matter. For me, everything is leading up to the race. And for a race like Black Canyon100k, I measured heart rate, I measured core body temperature, but I didn't look at it once during the race. For me, it's just great to have those data points for planning for Western States.
Mm-hmm.
But so in training, I'm looking at a combination of heart rate and sort of perceived rate of effort, how hard I'm working. And they kind of all sync up. And I think that I'm pretty in tune by a race. On race day, I'd probably be able to tell you without looking at my watch what pace we're running, what my heart rate is, probably within 3 beats of what it actually is, because I become so in tune with it during a training cycle. Like I do everything on heart rate. I do a lot on lactate, but I use lactate not for seeing how hard I'm working necessarily, but to make sure I'm actually working at the right level, mostly so I'm not working too hard. So like I probably take lactate more on an easy phase than I do on a hard phase.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, I would rather run too easy. I'd rather run 20% too easy in an easy run than 1% too hard in an easy run.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge mistake that people make. And I think for me, I like doing all of my easy runs on my own. And even if we're sort of with the Adidas Terex team, or I'm with some friends on a training camp, I will always try and do my easy runs on my own, or just say to the people, guys, like, I'm running easy. If you want to run with me, that's great, but it might be too easy for you. I'm very much running at my pace. So then come race day, you're used to it, and you kind of know how you're feeling. So yeah, in a race, I don't look at data. It's all about feel. I guess the one bit
maybe data is not the right word, but for example, what I'm getting at is that after the race, you said something to the effect of that you guys got to Bumblebee, which is roughly mile 20, 8 minutes faster than you expected. So the disciplined Tom, the quintessential race manager, was probably second guessing himself. But you also have to listen to your instinct, and you also have to respond to the competition. So I'm trying to get towards that when it comes to race management. What were you balancing there in terms of your priorities? Was it hanging on to the pack, or was it listening to your gut and your perceived effort? Or clearly you didn't stick to your splits. So
no, far from. I think for me, I guess the race plan was, 1, I wanted to have fun. And then 2, I wanted to test myself to see where I was, to identify areas of weakness that I can improve on. see where I am. See, like it's very easy to do a good workout at home when you're feeling great, and to think, oh, I'm Superman, I'm unbeatable. And it takes pushing beyond what you think you're capable of, that I don't really do in training. I never push myself to the limit in training, because I'm all about, yes, I do some very hard workouts, but I'm all about consistency. And I'd rather train at 90% capacity for 12 months rather than train at 101% for 6 months and then get injured, because I've made that mistake before. So yeah, I guess sort of during the race, my plan was, to go with a group, to be part of the lead group. And if someone was going to try and get away, kind of just go on gut. And if I thought that actually this looks like a pretty good break, then maybe it's time to close it. So when Cole went, I was like, I'll just let him go. And he got into Bumblebee, and I came into Bumblebee, and the people were like, he's like 2 minutes in front. And I'm thinking, geez, he's put 2 minutes into us in like 5 miles.
Yeah.
So I then sort of picked up a little bit, and possibly picked up a little bit too quick. And then I then caught him like 3/4 of the way, just after Soap Creek. I caught him, and probably that's where I burnt my matches. And it was probably not having the confidence in my training, because it wasn't a particularly long training block. I took 2 weeks off just before Christmas on a honeymoon, and then built things back up from zero.
Yeah.
And that's by no means an excuse at all. I possibly wasn't as fit as I thought I was, or what my body was capable of doing wasn't there. And that's absolutely fine. That's what these efforts are for. And yeah, probably burnt a few too matches there. Maybe I didn't have the confidence to think, actually, I'll just sit back and see what happens. And I think maybe that's a bit of lack of experience, definitely in this sort of race, in the US style racing, because it is different to racing in Europe.
Just like for the Americans, it's hard to learn how to race in Europe too.
Yeah, the rule book goes out the window out here, and as does the form book, and I think that's great. I really enjoy this style of racing. So yeah, and then I think sort of, geez, we broke the 60k course record.
It was stupid, man. I mean, at the 14-mile aid station, I was doing the commentary, and there was 38 men under the existing course record. Of course, at the finish line, there was only 3 of you guys under that existing course record. And it makes me want to ask, Tom, about like the post-race assessment. You know, you're thinking about that moment where you burnt maybe a match or two too many chasing back up to Cole relatively early in the race, just after mile 20. How do you evaluate performance and internalized learnings after a race like Black Canyon?
I think it's all too easy to blame someone else, or not to take responsibility and say, it's just one of those days, or, it was my stomach's fault, or, I just couldn't do it. It was just, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was all the travel, or looking for excuses. And for me, like, when I make a mistake, or I'm not quite at the level that I want to be, I'd take it on the chin. And for me, it was my coach, Scott Johnson, messaged me straight away and said, like, really well done, like, great performance. And as I've looked, and I was like, yeah, like, I'm really, really happy with the performance, and it starts my year really nicely, and it puts me on a great trajectory. But there is a lot of work to be done. I've got a lot of work. Like, this is going to be, we sort of have planned out the training, which we'll probably go on and talk to for the next, pretty much till Western States. And like, it scares me. Like, it's super exciting. So yeah, post race, it was this is what I think we've done well in the training, but and that was 2 bullet points. And it was a short essay for these are the bits that we've got room to improve on. And we both kind of took it on the chin and we said, look, like, we knew this wasn't going to be an all polished performance, but actually it could have gone a lot worse.
Come on, also you ran 7:37 on the Black Canyon.
But it also could have gone better.
Sure.
And I think that's the really nice thing about racing in an environment like this is, and with trail running, like, you can always do things better. You can always do things worse. And I think it's just, there's a very fine line of where performances, and no 2 races are the same. Just because you've won 100k somewhere doesn't mean you're going to win 100k somewhere else. And for me, like, looking back on this race, yes, there are definitely positives to take. Like, my nutrition was great. I was trying a fueling strategy that we're planning on implementing at Western States that is possibly slightly more aggressive than I've done before. My caffeine intake for this was by far the most aggressive strategy I've ever had. I had just under 800 milligrams of caffeine during the race, which I've never done before.
Have you slept since the race, Tom?
Yeah, just about. But for, like, it was purely like just trying to find the limits of where we think we can go, so following sports science. And I hadn't been able to test this strategy in training because I hadn't done anything longer than 3 hours.
Yeah.
So what a great opportunity to be able to put it into practice, and it worked really well. So great, that's a box ticked off. And so, I think post-race reflection for me is super important. But then to be able to, like, a great saying that I heard was, don't let the wins go to your head or the losses go to your heart. And I think it's so important. You want to race, great, celebrate it in the moment, because you don't know if you're ever going to get on the podium again. You don't know what's going to happen. Or you have a bad race. It's only running. It's only a trail. It's only a trail race.
That's a fairly do another profound principle. Don't let the wins go to your head or the losses go to your heart. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to use that on the podcast in the future.
I think it's super cool. Like,
that's great. Yeah.
In sport, you walk, you finish a race, you win. Imagine now, you win Western States. Great. The next day you go to the supermarket. No one knows who you cares. Are. No one cares. Especially in the sport, like in the sport that we're in, possibly a little bit different at UTMB and Chamonix, but the 2 days after UTMB, Soph and I went up at Gros du Midi.
Yep.
No one had any idea who I was. There were lots of people walking very slowly and limping about who'd obviously done a race.
Yeah.
No one once said, "Oh, Tom, well done. That was amazing." No one cares. No one knows. And I think it's just really nice, and it's incredibly humbling that, and it's the same when things go badly.
Yeah.
Just chalk it up to experience and what can I do to improve for the next one? And I think that's a really strong principle that I like to live by.
Yeah. Going back to Anthony for a second, I talked to him after the race and he described the moment where he made the decisive move. He said that it was sort of just after Black Canyon City, and he intentionally did it on a descent, recognizing that he was not going to be able to drop you on the climbs. I'm sure the audience would love to be on a fly on the wall in that moment. So if you could just kind of describe Anthony's move. I know you were very impressed by it. What was going through your head, and just anything else you can share about your perspective at that critical moment of the race.
Yeah. So I'd realized that we got to Black Canyon City way too quick. And I wasn't feeling things weren't easy.
Yeah.
And So I took the front and I was like, okay, let's just back things off. It's a little bit of a drag uphill out of Black Canyon City before you then do the descent to the river. So I took the lead and I sort of just try to slow things down, knowing that, and I'd sort of seen Anthony catching us and I was like, oh geez, he looks so great. He looks how I wish I looked. And yeah, I sort of tactically try to go to the front and control the race and just like, right, let's just pump the brakes. Let's let the nutrition that I've just had from Black Canyon City kick in. And let's wait for the caffeine to hit the bloodstream and you'll come back round again. And I think he probably noticed this sort of basically pulling the handbrake up. And yeah, he just sort of scooted past, and on the descent, these descents are pretty hard to follow someone on because they're pretty uneven, they're rocky everywhere. So you need like a 2-3 meter gap. So when he went past and picked the pace up, I was like, okay, this is all right. I'll just keep a 2 meter gap. And then 10 steps later, okay, this is now a 3 meter gap. That's okay. Then it was a 5 meter gap, and it just slowly went out and went out and went out. And it wasn't because I thought, okay, I'll just keep the handbrake on. It was okay, the handbrake's now off and my foot's on the floor. I'm just trying. And he just made the downhill running look effortless. It was as if he had tag teamed with someone and he had started again from Black Canyon City. Like it was doing post-race analysis. And if I was planning on racing Black Canyon City again, I would just copy exactly what he did. Yeah. And that's the time to make a break. Like no matter how good you are on the uphill, you're not making that much time back up. It was really special to see. Like I got dropped by Jim and Killian at UTMB at the top of pyramids.
Yep.
And I thought that, wow, these guys are going for it here. In my opinion, I think Anthony's breakaway from me at Black Canyon City was more spectacular than what Jim and Killian did at UTMB.
Wow.
Which is saying something.
It's high praise, especially for this low-key Utah-based assassin who just recently got dropped by his sponsors. He's obviously made a lot of big fans over the weekend, and those of us who know him are huge fans. And I'm sure he's really happy to hear you speak so respectfully about him. And again, it's just emblematic of the spirit of our sport that you two can have so much respect for each other, and you can share your admiration for his race execution and who he is as a person in the sport. So, I mean, congratulations to both you guys. And it's awesome that you could give us a little glimpse into that critical moment of the race.
I didn't, it was only a glimpse. I couldn't see him for very long.
I mean, man, it was an incredible race. It was an incredible race from both you guys. And yeah, I mean, his perfect execution, maybe you made one or two small mistakes at the end of the day. It was a 4-minute gap at the finish line, basically a blink of the eye. And you're both in perfect position for the rest of this amazing season. And eventually we'll get around to talking about what you have in front of you, because it's going to be huge. But you mentioned your coach, Scott Johnson, and I know this is a relatively new relationship. I think you guys connected after your surgery. So I'd love to hear what he's changed in your training, and what ways you're a different athlete based on your relationship with Scott and how you guys train together.
Yeah. So Scott and I started working. I had my operation on a Friday. Scott and I started working together the Tuesday before the operation. And I think any high-level coach who's prepared to take an athlete 3.5, 4 days before they undergo surgery that they might never come back from is someone that you want in your corner. And I guess we sort of set our goals for what we kind of wanted to achieve and what we thought might be possible. And whereas my previous approach, when I'd been running a little bit more on the road in during the pandemic was like, what's the maximum amount that I can push my body that it will accept? Rather than with Scott, we took the approach of, for the whole build for UTMB, including racing at Transgran Canaria 60K and Madeira 85K, was not what's the most you can push your body and how good can you get. It was what is the minimum amount of work that we can do in order to make the necessary adaptations to be able to perform at your relative highest level in these races and in these environments. So we very quickly identified that, like, flat speed running, fine. Do I need to be able to run any quicker than 63:07 half marathon if I'm training for UTMB? No. Like, there's no point. There's absolutely no point. Like, so, okay, well, that's great. Your upper end stuff on the flat is great. But what's your hill climbing like? And like, my relative VO2 max for running on the flat compared to running uphill, like, it was stupidly bad.
Yeah.
The equivalent of my uphill VK on a treadmill. Yeah, I know it's a bit different, but it's easy to do, especially when you live in the UK. Like, it was the equivalent of running like 17 and a half minute 5K, whereas I'm a 13:40 5K runner. So like, it was way off where it should have been.
Yeah.
And like, of course it was. It's something that I've never trained for. And it's how I could do well in a race like CCC, because it's so runnable. So when we thought, okay, well, actually now you're racing an actual proper mountain race where there's so much hiking, this is something that we need to really improve on. So we thought, right, well, how can we improve in this, and what do we think is the best way? And Scott's he's very good at adapting proven methods into the trail running and the mountain running space. So his trail running influences are hugely based off Renito Canova in Kenya and the approach that he takes with his athletes. Scott then takes that approach and takes those workouts, but modifies them to become specific for trail running and mountain running. And that's what I needed to get good at. I needed to be better at expedition fitness and being good in the mountains and creating strategies that I can perform at a high level in mountains.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the training was, I'd done stuff that I had never done before, and we used the treadmill a lot. So going between like 20 and 25% incline. Fortunate enough to have a treadmill at home, and I have a ski erg attached to the wall in front of the treadmill. So when I'm on the treadmill on an incline, I can use the ski erg. So it's as if I'm using poles.
Oh my gosh. So was the reason you connected with Scott or identified him as a potentially great coach because of the fact that you wanted to be better in the mountains specifically?
100%. I wanted a coach who had experience taking athletes and adventurers up Everest and being able to create, like, I didn't want, like, the previous coaches I've had, both incredible. Alison Benton, who was my first coach that I won CCC with, and then Andy Hobdell when I was in the pandemic. And yeah, they were both amazing. And I got really fast at running.
Yeah.
And I now know how to do that. And I kind of don't really need a coach for that. I'd be happy to self-coach myself now with that.
Yeah.
But the UTMB was a completely different ball game, and I wasn't at all experienced in running 100-mile mountains or which kind of took as more of an expedition rather than a race. It was an adventure rather than a race.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was so liberating that I could take the performance metrics that I'd been measuring since I was 13 years old, kind of all went out the window, and it was completely new to me, which was super fun. And I guess definitely taking a lot of the same mentality into this Western States training block of, okay, well, we trained super specifically for UTMB. What was my training like for Western States in 2019? And it obviously worked. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
But what can we do to optimize it? Where do we think the areas of weakness was from your race in 2019 and your training leading up to it? And how do you think, what can we do now to put yourself in the best possible position to have the best possible race come June?
Yeah. So I'd love to talk about specificity and versatility. And the two things are deeply intertwined, but maybe let's start with versatility. You are the type of athlete who can run a 63-minute half marathon. You've also been on the podium of both Western States and UTMB, meaning you've got insane range. I wonder if you could elaborate on how you've been able to cultivate that versatility in your athletic performance.
I think similar to you, coming from a different sport background, doing very generalist training, that then I find adding the specificity fairly easy to do. Like my training, 75% of the time, whether I was training for Western States or UTMB, looks pretty similar. It's then just the specificity on the end, the sharpening up, the tip of the iceberg, call it what you want to call it.
Yeah.
Because I've got a great base level of aerobic fitness from playing sports when I was a kid to then joining the military and then loving running, cycling, whatever it is. And yeah, have built up that endurance over the years. And it's not something that I do a bit of coaching, and some of my athletes think that by taking 3 days off, they're going to lose everything. And it's like, well, it doesn't, you might lose a little bit, but it doesn't really work like that. Like your body remembers. And yeah, I think the thing that I love about trail running is you'll do a trail race, and there are uphills, there are downhills, there are technical bits, there are super runnable bits. There is not one person who is the best at everything. Yep. And I think you need to have that versatility in your running to be able to have a really good race. Like take Western States, for example, like you've got to be super efficient at climbing, because you've got to do the first climb and get to the top and think, okay, cool, I've now warmed up and I feel great. I've not produced any lactic acid and I'm now ready for a fairly cruisy downhill. Okay, now we then go into the really alpine part, and there's lots of switchbacks, there's lots of twists, turns. You've got to be super mobile. You've got to be able to deal with that and stay super relaxed. Go through the canyons. You've got to be efficient on the downhill. You've got to be efficient on the uphill. You've got to put into place a cooling strategy for that, because that's where races are won and lost. Mm-hmm. You then come into Forest Hill. You've got to deal with the crowds cheering for you. So you've got to stay relaxed, but you're also probably quicker than somewhere between 6:30 and 7-minute miling through Forest Hill.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to do that. And for me, it's breaking down these different races and being like, right, well, what have I got to do in training to be able to come race day, make this super easy? So I think being really versatile, when you then pick a specific, I hate the term A race, but you pick an A race, you just need you've got that foundation, you've got all of those pillars. Yeah, so you've got all of these pillars like this, and you think, okay, well, this race, I think the key points are going to be this pillar, and this pillar.
Okay.
So let's just really sharpen those, and the others will come up a little bit, but actually that's what I need to be really good at. So if I look back at Black Canyons, and if I was doing it again, I'd say, okay, well, I need to be super efficient, but actually my downhill running, I probably need to improve my 10-minute downhill running pace. So then when Anthony then kicks coming out of Black Canyon City, I can go with it.
Huh. This is fascinating. So let's go deeper on specificity, because I think the audience could really learn something from this. And we'll use Black Canyon as an example. Of course, you live in cold, damp UK. Black Canyon was dry, desert, wasn't crazy warm, but can be quite hot. I know you took a trip out to the Canary Islands. So maybe, just give a glimpse into what you were doing to enhance the specificity of your training for Black Canyon specifically.
I think for Black, it's tricky, and I don't want to I didn't do that much specific training for Black Canyon 100k in particular, because for me, this was very much part of the process. And actually training for Western States, Black Canyon 100k is the specificity for the race.
So maybe the better question is, how does the specificity of Black Canyon fit into we'll use the term A goal, even though we don't like it. And then, what have you identified as the specific things that you're going to work on now in the next couple of months leading into Western States?
I think it's almost doing going back to school, doing like a SWOT analysis, as people would do in business, like strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threat. And I do that, and I write it down on an A4 bit of paper of, right, what are my Western States 100 miler is the title. Right. What are my strengths going into this race? Cool. You've got the experience. You know what it takes to finish on the podium. You know what it takes. Yes, it was a cool year. Still felt ridiculously hot for me. But you know what it takes to run sub 15. Cool. What are the opportunities? Well, I'm now a different athlete to what I was in 2019. This is what I've done. I've improved in this area, this area, this area, this area. Right. My weaknesses, right. What can we improve on in order to get you better? Right. Eccentric quad strength, efficiency at running downhill. Okay, great. And that then goes on to set goals. Right. What are the threats? The heat, even on a cold year, it's still hot when you come from the UK, and shed loads of downhill running to wreck your quads. And nutrition, because what is like a stat, like 85% of DNFs come from nutrition. Okay, cool. So I've now laid all of that out, and it's now really easy to see, okay, well, now what's the specific training I can do? How can I turn those threats into opportunities and those weaknesses into strengths? So I take heat, for example, which is that becomes the biggest topic of Western State. It's have you seen the weather? What's it going to be like? Oh, is it going to be a hot year or a cold year? It's going to be a hard year, no matter what.
Yep. There's going to be snow too, Tom. I'm here to tell you there's going to be snow on the course.
There's going to be tons of snow.
Yeah.
But I think that snow then adds an element to it. You're going to go from there's no point. You look at professional cyclists at the Tour de France this year or last year, and everyone's doing pre-cooling for a 6-7 hour race. There's no point in doing a pre-cooling strategy, because it's going to be, you're definitely going to start in sleeves and quite possibly a jacket.
Yeah.
So pre-cooling goes out the window. So I then think right, well, who is the best person to speak to? Who are the best people to speak to about getting good in the heat for endurance athletes? So I then delve into British Olympic Association and their heat preparation for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and for the marathon, and what were they prescribing to the athletes for that? That's one side of it. I then speak to the performance director at Ineos about what were they doing in order to prepare for the heat for the Tour de France. That was one of the hottest races in history. Mm-hmm. Yes, cycling is a little bit different to running, but the principles are the same. So then from that, you can say, okay, well, cool. Well, that's in order for me to get as best heat prepared, this is what I know I need to do. And I'm happy to take for some of my training to reduce in order for that pillar to increase. So I can control how well heat adapted I am. And yes, does that mean that a 2-week block in April, May, 95% of my running is going to be in an environmental chamber at 105 degrees, 40% relative humidity, trying to replicate the Western States coast as best as possible. That's hard. That's boring. That's ridiculously expensive. But it's an investment into myself because I've identified when I was thinking rationally, one of my biggest threats for me not to have a good day at Western States is the heat. So you find a way, right? Well, okay, that's great. You've identified it, but now the hard work starts. And what do I do in order for that not to become an issue? And I think, that's the methodical way that I think about things. And
that's incredible, Tom. And I love using the SWOT analysis and the metaphor of making an investment in yourself, because at the end of the day, this is your job. This is your career. And
I'm my walking business.
Yeah. Wow. So it's great to get a glimpse into this. You posted earlier this year, I think it was, just sort of announcing your season. You said Black Canyon was first. That's been checked off the list. You also mentioned maybe you would do the 50K at Canyons. Is that still on the radar? And more generally, is there any other competition where we can expect to see Tom Evans between now and the last weekend in June?
Yeah, I have actually decided not to race. I'm telling you, I've not actually told them yet. But in the last couple of days, decided not to race at Canyons 50K. It just doesn't, it makes sense to do a 50K tempo effort at that time before the race. But actually for me, I don't think that's going to be the make and break for Western States. I would rather, that's a race that you need to taper for and you need to take seriously, and because the field it's going to be bonkers, and it's close enough to the race that if things don't go completely to plan, there's not an awful lot you can do about it. So I've actually decided to hunker down in the UK. Like, I train best when I'm happy. And I'm now married, dogs, chickens, a grown-up life. And I love being at home. I love spending time with Soph. I love spending time with the dogs and with friends and family. And I've decided I'm actually going to race the 25K at Snowdon as a really hard tempo run, which is a couple of weeks. It's like 2 weeks later. I'll race that instead and then come out to Flagstaff for the final 5 weeks or 4.5 weeks before Western States, and then head over to Olympic Valley just before the race. I'll race a little bit of fell running as well, just to sharpen up. The fell runners running downhill is poetry. It's poetry of how to run downhill and then be able to run ridiculously quick on the flat afterwards, and building up efficiency in your downhill running at a much harder effort than ultra pace, which is it's one of the threats of, you hear so many people saying, oh yeah, my quads just completely locked up and I had nothing in my quads. If you can try and keep up with some of the best fell runners in the UK running downhill off trail,
you're in good shape for Western States.
You're going to be in great. So it's basically, how much can I beat myself up? So I'll do a little bit of fell running, which I'm really excited about.
Cool.
And yeah, and then I get the rest of the season it's slightly open. I would be lying if I said I hadn't thought about doing a Western States UTMB double. That's why I'm getting a stone at Snowdon. I just need to get a stone.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hey, we don't need to look past Western States,
No.
Process, not outcome, right? I learned that.
Exactly.
Tom, this has been so fun, man. I appreciate all your time. Before we get to our sort of closing philosophical questions, is there anything else that is on your mind right now that we didn't touch on? Things that are interesting to you, things you're thinking about in your training, other takeaways from Black Canyon that you'd like to get off your chest?
Yeah, I think the one sort of bit of the Tom's top tip, we'll call it today, is I think people see, whenever people post training or videos or whatever of their training, they're always going ridiculously fast and it looks really cool and it looks sexy and it looks great. 85% of my training is super boring, super conservative, not running in a beautiful place. And for me, that's where races are won and lost. It's behind the scenes where everything happens. So
it's not on TikTok or Instagram Reels. I love that.
Precisely. Yeah, just because it's not on. Just because you've not posted about a run and how great it was doesn't mean it wasn't a great run.
Yeah.
So yeah, just for everyone who's training for a race, just because you're seeing people doing the cool epic runs doesn't mean they're also not pounding on the pavement at 4 a.m. before catching a flight because they've got to get an hour's run in and it's dark and they've not got a head torch with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be
the blue collar, behind the scenes work that nobody notices. That's where it matters. All right. So 2 closing questions for you, Tom. The first is, who is one person you admire inside or outside of sport, and why is it that you admire that person?
A good question. So I actually took this to not a person, but a team. So for me, growing up, I was a huge rugby fan, and I played lots of rugby and I loved it. It was my thing. And for me, the team that is high performance through and through is New Zealand, the All Blacks.
The All Blacks. I just had Dan Jones on the podcast and we talked about the haka, and I regretted the fact that I didn't bring up the All Blacks, because it's a spiritual experience to see those guys do the haka on the field.
Yeah.
And of course, they represent their country in the most profound way. And I would be so intimidated if I was on any other team when they break that haka out. Keep going if there's anything you want to add.
Precisely. And with them, like, what I learned from doing research and speaking to people, and they've just recently signed with Ineos, so I've had a little bit of an insight through the performance side from Ineos about it. And similar to what the last comment on training was, like 99% of their training is super, super basic. And they are the best at basics. And that's good enough to be the best in the world, because not everything has got to be super highbrow. But then at the same time, they are investing so much in themselves as individuals and as a team in order to improve and to find those marginal gains where they can. And they are forever innovating in order to improve. And I think that investment, that doesn't have to be financial or whatever your investment is, but you invest time and effort into yourself, you're significantly more likely to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think what they do and what they stand for is they're not only like the shirt that they wear, they say it's not their shirt. They are just looking after this for the country and to then hand it over in a better place than the next person. And for me, that's so humble for the best people in the world who don't see themselves as that. They just see themselves as forever just wanting to improve and get better. You never reach the summit because there's always space to grow.
Wow. I love it. Final question for you, Tom. What is one truth that you've learned about yourself or about life in general through your experience as an athlete?
I think kind of going back to something that you said, but slightly modifying it. So process, not outcome, I think is incredibly, it is super important. And it's one of the foundations of my training. But I think taking like the second iteration of that is, instead of trust the process, it's trust your process. Whatever, doesn't matter what other people are doing. Let them do what they want to do. Let them run fast. Let them run slow. You worry about you and trust your process. The rational plan that you made when you were thinking straight is what is best for you. And it's yours. So own it. And I think that is, your process is the best process. My process is the best process for one person, and that's me.
Yeah.
And you've got to trust that you're doing the right thing. And if at any point that you don't trust you're doing the right thing, then that's then time to switch things up and invest in yourself, whether that's by seeking help from elsewhere because you don't trust your process. Find a way that you do trust your process and believe in yourself.
Tom Evans, congratulations on Black Canyon. Thanks for coming on the pod. We'll see you at Western States.
Thank you so much. See you at States.